The world is still dark. The streets are empty, save for the occasional distant sound of a horse's hooves on cobblestone, or perhaps the faint call of a night watchman making his final rounds. Most of London sleeps. But in a small bakery on a narrow side street, a different kind of day is already beginning. This is the world of the Victorian baker. A world of flour dust hanging in lamplight, of dough rising slowly in wooden troughs, of ovens that must be coaxed to life in the deep hours before dawn. It is a world built on routine, on the steady rhythm of hands working, on the quiet patience required to turn simple ingredients into the bread that will feed a neighborhood. Tonight, we'll step into that world. We'll follow the baker through those dark early hours. We'll feel the cold of the morning air, the warmth of the oven, the texture of dough beneath tired fingers. There's no drama here, no excitement, just work, simple, honest work, the kind that has been done in much the same way for hundreds of years. So settle in. Let the quietness of this world wash over you, and let us begin, as the baker does, in darkness. It is 3 o'clock in the morning when Thomas Fletcher opens his eyes. There is no alarm clock, no sudden jolt. His body simply knows the time. After 20 years of this routine, his body has learned when to wake, just as surely as it knows when to feel hunger or thirst. The room is cold. Even in summer, these early hours carry a chill. In winter, frost forms on the inside of the windows, delicate patterns of ice that catch whatever moonlight might filter through. But Thomas doesn't linger in bed. Lingering makes it harder. Better to rise at once, before the body can protest, before the mind can suggest that perhaps another hour of sleep might be possible. He swings his legs out from under the heavy wool blankets. His feet find the cold wooden floor. The boards creak slightly as he stands. Through the thin wall, he can hear his wife's breathing, slow and steady. She will wake in another hour, perhaps 2, to begin her own work. But for now, this time belongs to him alone. Thomas lights a small oil lamp that sits on the table beside his bed. The flame catches, flickers, then grows steady. The warm glow pushes back against the darkness, though it doesn't travel far. Just enough to see by. Just enough to dress. His clothes are folded on a chair beside the bed. The same clothes he wears every morning. Heavy canvas trousers, slightly dusted with flour that never quite washes out. A linen shirt, worn soft from years of wear. A thick vest, its buttons smooth from countless fastening and unfastening. He dresses slowly, methodically. There is no rush yet. The rhythm of the morning has its own pace, and he has learned not to fight against it. When he is dressed, Thomas picks up his lamp and makes his way down the narrow staircase. The stairs creak under his weight. Each step has its own particular sound, a language he can read in the darkness. The third step from the top groans longest. The seventh makes a sharp crack. The bottom step, worn smooth in the center from decades of feet, is nearly silent. At the bottom of the stairs is a door. Beyond that door is the shop, and beyond the shop the bakery itself. But Thomas doesn't go straight there. First, he moves to the small kitchen area at the back of the ground floor. Here, he performs the same ritual he has performed every morning for years. He fills a kettle with water from the pump in the corner. The handle requires 3 firm strokes before the water begins to flow, cold and clear. The sound of water splashing into the metal kettle is loud in the silent house. When the kettle is half full, he places it on the hook above the fireplace. The fireplace holds the embers from last night's fire. Carefully banked before bed, Thomas kneels before it now, sets his lamp aside, and begins to revive those embers. A few pieces of kindling arranged just so. A gentle breath of air, not too much, not too little. The embers glow brighter, orange and red. A small flame appears, tentative at first, then growing bolder as it finds the dry wood. He adds larger pieces now, building the fire up slowly. It will take time for the water to boil, and he has learned not to rush this part. The tea will be the only thing he consumes for the next several hours, and it should be made properly. Some things deserve patience, even in the rush of the morning. While the water heats, Thomas sits at the small wooden table. The lamp casts shadows that dance slightly in the barely perceptible air currents. Outside, the world remains dark and still. Inside, there is only the crackling of the fire, the occasional tick of the kettle as it expands with heat, and the sound of his own breathing. He doesn't think much during these moments. His mind is quiet, resting before the work begins. Perhaps he notices the way the lamplight reflects off the copper kettle. Perhaps he sees the shadow of his own hands on the table. Perhaps he simply exists, present in this quiet pocket of time. The kettle begins to whisper, then murmur, then finally sing with the sound of boiling water. Thomas rises, wraps a cloth around the handle, and pours the water over tea leaves in his mug. The steam rises, carrying with it the earthy scent of black tea. He lets it steep while he returns the kettle to its hook. When the tea is ready, he drinks it slowly, standing by the dying fire. It's hot enough to require careful sips. The warmth spreads through him, waking parts of his body that were still half sleeping. He doesn't rush. There will be time enough for rushing once the work begins. When the mug is empty, Thomas rinses it in the basin and sets it aside to dry. Then he takes his lamp, pushes open the door to the shop, and steps into the space where he will spend the next 12 hours. The shop is dark and silent. In a few hours, it will be filled with customers, with conversation, with the exchange of coins and the rustling of paper as loaves are wrapped. But now it is empty, and Thomas's footsteps echo slightly on the wooden floor as he crosses from the front door to the back room. The back room is the bakery itself. It is larger than one might expect from looking at the modest shopfront. The ceiling is high, necessary for dispersing heat and steam. The walls are whitewashed, though they show the accumulated marks of years of use. Darker patches where steam has condensed regularly. Scuff marks at waist height where troughs have been moved and replaced countless times. Near the ovens, there is a permanent darkening, a record of all the heat that has radiated from those brick faces. Thomas sets his lamp on a shelf and immediately begins lighting the other lamps that hang at intervals around the room. One by one they come to life, and the bakery emerges from darkness. Work tables appear, their surfaces worn smooth and slightly concave, in the centers from years of kneading. Shelves along the walls, empty now, waiting for the loaves that will fill them later. The wooden troughs where dough will rise. The great brick oven that dominate the far wall, still cold now, but not for long. Everything has its place. The sacks of flour are stacked along the left wall, each one marked with the mill's stamp. They are made of heavy canvas, rough to the touch, and each one weighs nearly half as much as a man. Next to them, the salt, also in sacks, though much smaller. On a high shelf, away from moisture, the yeast. It comes in compressed blocks, brownish grey, with a distinctive smell that is both earthy and sharp. The measuring cups and scales sit on a shelf near the tables. Thomas has weighed and measured so many times that he could almost do it by feel alone, but he still uses the tools. Precision matters in baking. A little too much salt, and the bread tastes harsh. Too little, and it's bland. Too much yeast, and the bread rises too fast, creating large, uneven holes. Too little, and it never properly rises at all. But before any of that, before any measuring or mixing, there is the oven. Thomas approaches the largest of the two ovens. It is built directly into the wall, its opening a great arched mouth of blackened brick. The bricks are special, designed to withstand and retain intense heat. They were laid by a master oven builder, each one positioned with exacting care. And they have been serving this bakery for 30 years. Inside the oven, the floor is flat and clear, swept clean after yesterday's baking. The ceiling of the oven chamber is domed, designed to reflect heat downward evenly. At the very back, there is a small opening that leads to the chimney. Right now, everything is cold, but in a few hours, this space will be hot enough to bake a man's hand if he were foolish enough to reach inside. Thomas begins the process of heating the oven. This is perhaps the most important task of the entire day, and also the one that cannot be rushed. An oven that is too cool will produce pale, dense bread. An oven that is too hot will burn the outside while leaving the inside raw. The oven must be brought to exactly the right temperature, and that temperature must be maintained throughout the baking. He starts by opening the small iron door at the base of the oven. This provides access to the firebox, where the fuel burns. The firebox is separate from the baking chamber itself, positioned below and to the side. The heat from the fire will travel through channels in the brick, warming the entire structure gradually and evenly. Thomas checks the firebox. There is ash from yesterday's fire, which he scoops out into a metal bucket using a small shovel. The ash will be used later for the garden, but for now he sets it aside. With the ash removed, he can see the bottom of the firebox, blackened from years of fire. Now he begins to build the fire. He starts with the smallest pieces first. Kindling, mostly. Small branches, wood shavings, a few pieces of paper. These he arranges in a loose pile, creating channels for air to flow through. Fire needs air as much as it needs fuel, and a fire that is packed too tightly will suffocate before it truly begins. He uses a long match to light the paper. It catches immediately, and small flames begin to spread to the kindling. Thomas doesn't close the firebox door yet. He watches to make sure the fire is establishing itself, that it's drawing air properly, that the smoke is flowing up through the flue as it should. The kindling begins to burn more vigorously. The flames grow, reaching upward, finding more fuel. When Thomas is satisfied, he begins adding larger pieces. Split logs about the thickness of his wrist. He adds them one at a time, placing them carefully. Too much wood too quickly, and the fire will struggle. Added gradually, each piece catches from the one before it, and the fire grows steadily. Within 10 minutes, there is a proper fire burning in the firebox. The flames are bright and steady, and Thomas can feel the first hint of warmth beginning to radiate from the oven's exterior. He closes the firebox door most of the way, leaving it slightly ajar to control the airflow. Now begins the long process of heating the bricks. The fire must be maintained, fed regularly, kept at a consistent intensity. Too hot, and the bricks nearest the firebox will heat unevenly. Too cool, and the entire process will take much longer than it should. Thomas has done this so many times that he knows by instinct when to add more wood, when to adjust the door, when to leave well enough alone. While the oven heats, he prepares the second oven. This one is smaller, and it will be used for different products later in the morning. The process is the same, though it requires less wood. Thomas builds the fire, lights it, and settles it into a steady burn. The bakery is beginning to warm now. The heat from the two ovens, still gentle at this early stage, is pushing back against the cold of the night. Thomas can feel the difference in the air. In another hour, the room will be comfortable. In 2 hours, it will be quite warm. By the time the sun rises, he will be working in his shirt sleeves, flour dust sticking to the perspiration on his forearms. But that is still to come. For now, he has fires to tend and dough to begin. The fires are burning steadily. The ovens are beginning their slow climb toward baking temperature. Now Thomas turns his attention to the dough. He starts with the sponge that was prepared yesterday evening before the bakery closed. It sits in a large wooden trough, covered with a damp cloth to keep it from drying out. When Thomas pulls back the cloth, he is greeted with the distinctive smell of fermentation, yeast, working through the night, consuming sugars, producing the gases that will leaven the bread. It is a living thing, this sponge, and it must be treated with respect. The sponge is a simple mixture that was made 12 hours ago. Flour, water, and yeast, combined and left to ferment slowly. It has bubbled and expanded, developing flavor and structure. This slow fermentation is what gives the bread its character, its depth of taste. Bread made quickly, without this patience, is flat and uninteresting. But bread that has had time to develop, that has been allowed to ferment properly, has complexity. Thomas examines the sponge. He looks at its texture, how it clings to the sides of the trough. He smells it, checking for the right balance of tang and sweetness. He touches it, feeling its consistency. Everything tells him it is ready. He begins adding the additional ingredients. First, more flour. He uses a wooden scoop to measure it from one of the large sacks. The flour flows in a pale stream, settling on top of the sponge like snow. It takes several scoops to add the amount needed. He doesn't measure with exacting precision at this stage. His eye has learned what the proportion should look like. Next, salt. He measures this more carefully, using a small cup to portion it out. Salt is important for flavor, but also for controlling the fermentation. Too much, and the yeast is inhibited. Too little, and the fermentation can become wild and unpredictable. Finally, more water. Cool water from the same pump he used earlier. He adds it gradually, pouring it over the flour and sponge mixture. Now comes the work of mixing. Thomas rolls up his sleeves past his elbows and plunges his hands into the trough. The mixture is rough at first, dry flour and wet sponge existing in separate states. His hands work through it, pushing, folding, gathering. Gradually, the ingredients begin to come together The flour absorbs the water, the sponge distributes throughout. What was separate becomes unified. He mixes in a steady rhythm. Push down with the heels of both hands. Fold the dough over itself. Turn the trough slightly. Push again. Fold again. Turn again. There is no hurry. The dough will come together in its own time. Rushing will accomplish nothing except to tire him out before the real work of kneading begins. After several minutes, the dough has formed a shaggy mass. It's still rough, still uneven, but it has coherence now. Thomas lifts it from the trough, a considerable weight in his arms, and transfers it to one of the work tables. The table's surface is dusted with the flour to prevent sticking. Now he begins to knead. Kneading is the heart of the baker's craft. It is what transforms a rough mixture into smooth, elastic dough. It develops the gluten, the protein network that will trap the gases from fermentation and give the bread its structure. Without proper kneading, bread would be dense and crumbly. With it, bread can be light and springy, with a satisfying chew. Thomas's technique has been refined over 20 years. He pushes the dough away from himself with the heels of his hands, using his body weight to apply pressure. Then he folds the far edge back toward himself. A quarter turn. Push again. Fold again. Turn again. It is repetitive work, but there is a rhythm to it that becomes almost meditative. At first, the dough is sticky and difficult to work with. It clings to his hands, to the table. But as he continues to knead, it begins to change. The flour on the table's surface is gradually incorporated. The gluten develops, and the dough becomes smoother, more elastic. It starts to feel alive under his hands, responsive. Thomas can feel the moment when the dough is ready. It's not something he can explain precisely, but he knows it. The dough has a certain spring to it when he presses down. It holds its shape when he stops kneading. The surface has a subtle sheen, and when he stretches a small piece, it becomes translucent without tearing. This process has taken perhaps 15 minutes. Some bakers would say that's not long enough. That dough should be kneaded for half an hour or more. But Thomas has learned that over-kneading can be as much a problem as under-kneading. The dough can become tough, resistant. Better to stop when it feels right. He shapes the dough into a rough ball and returns it to the trough. The trough is wiped clean now and lightly oiled to prevent sticking. The dough goes in, and Thomas covers it again with the damp cloth. Now the dough must rest. It will rise slowly as the yeast continues its work, expanding the gluten network that Thomas has developed through kneading. This rising or proofing will take time. An hour, perhaps slightly more, depending on the temperature of the room. While that first batch of dough rises, Thomas begins the process again with a second batch, more flour, more water, more salt. More mixing, more kneading. By the time the sun begins to lighten the sky, there will be 3 large batches of dough in various stages of rising, enough to produce the morning's bread. The work is physical, but it's not frantic. There is time between each task for the body to rest, for the arms to recover. Thomas has learned to pace himself. The day is long, and there's no benefit to exhausting himself in the first hour. Thomas is halfway through kneading the second batch of dough when he hears the familiar sound of the side door opening. Heavy footsteps on the brick floor, the shuffle of someone removing a coat. "Morning, Mr. Fletcher." "Morning, James." James Parker is 16 years old, apprenticed to Thomas these past 2 years. He's a good lad, strong and willing, though still learning the subtleties of the craft. He arrives every morning at 5, having walked from his family's lodgings 3 streets over. In the winter, he walks through darkness and sometimes snow. In the summer, he walks through the earliest light of dawn. He's never late. James hangs his coat on a peg by the door and ties an apron around his waist. The apron is already well worn, dusted with the permanent patina of flour that never quite washes out. He rolls his sleeves up past his elbows, just as Thomas does, and approaches the work table. "Ovens coming along?" James asks, though it's more ritual than actual question. He can see the glow from the fireboxes, can feel the growing warmth in the room. "They're coming along," Thomas confirms. "Should be ready within the hour." James nods. He knows what this means. He has certain tasks that must be completed before the baking begins. He has learned the routine, the sequence of things, the choreography of the morning. He begins by checking the wood supply. There are logs stacked near the ovens, but they'll need more throughout the morning. James makes several trips to the wood store, a lean-to structure in the small yard behind the bakery. He brings in armloads of split logs, stacking them neatly where they'll be easy to reach. The wood is dry, seasoned for at least a year. Wet wood would produce too much smoke and wouldn't burn hot enough. While James handles the wood, Thomas finishes kneading the second batch of dough and sets it to rise. Then he checks on the first batch, pulling back the cloth to examine its progress. It has expanded noticeably, perhaps half again its original size. The surface is smooth and rounded. When he presses a finger gently into it, the indentation slowly fills back in. Not quite ready yet, but progressing well. James returns from his final trip to the wood store, slightly out of breath. "What's next, Mr. Fletcher?" "The bins need filling," Thomas says, "and then you can start the morning rolls." James nods and moves to the storage area. The bins are large wooden containers built into the wall near the work tables. They hold the flour that will be used throughout the day. It's more efficient than constantly going to the large sacks in the corner. The bins have sloped bottoms that allow the flour to flow easily when scooped, and tight-fitting lids to keep out moisture and pests. Using a smaller sack, he can actually carry. James fills each bin from the main supply. It's dusty work. Flour particles hang in the air, caught in the lamplight, slowly drifting downward. By the time he's finished, his apron and arms are coated with a fine white powder. He'll carry that dusting with him throughout the day, no matter how many times he tries to brush it off. With the bins filled, James begins work on the morning rolls. These are smaller than loaves, meant to be sold individually or by the half dozen. They're popular with working people who can't afford a whole loaf, or with those who prefer their bread very fresh. The process is similar to what Thomas did earlier, but on a smaller scale. James mixes his dough in one of the smaller troughs: flour, water, salt, yeast. His hands work through the mixture, not quite as efficiently as Thomas's more experienced movements, but competently enough. He's learned well. Thomas watches from the corner of his eye while he attends to other tasks. He doesn't hover or criticize. James knows what's expected, and he's perfectly capable of doing it. The occasional correction is needed, perhaps, but mostly Thomas lets the boy work. That's how one learns, after all. Not through constant instruction, but through doing. Through repetition. Through developing one's own feel for the work. The rhythm of the bakery has shifted now. Where before there was only Thomas moving through his tasks, now there are two sets of hands, two people working in the space. They move around each other naturally, each aware of where the other is, without having to look. Thomas steps aside as James carries his trough of dough to another work table. James pauses his kneading to let Thomas pass with an armload of equipment. They don't talk much. There's no need. The work is familiar, the routine established. Conversation would only be a distraction. Besides, this early in the morning, neither of them is particularly inclined toward chatter. The quiet is comfortable, broken only by the sounds of work, the slap of the dough on the table, the crackle from the ovens, the occasional scrape of a tool being moved. Outside, the world is beginning its own awakening. Through the high windows of the bakery, the darkness is starting to fade. It's not light yet, not properly, but the quality of the darkness has changed. It's thinning, becoming grey rather than black. The stars, if they could be seen through the perpetual haze of London's air, would be fading. The night is ending. But inside the bakery, the work continues as it has for the past 2 hours, as it will continue for many more. Time is marked not by the clock, but by the stages of bread making. The dough rises, the ovens heat, the work progresses. The first batch of dough has risen fully now. When Thomas uncovers it, the dough has doubled in size, filling the trough with a pale, billowing mass. The surface is smooth and slightly domed. When he presses a finger into it, the indentation remains. This is what he's been waiting for. He dusts the work table with flour and transfers the dough from the trough. It's a soft and puffy, full of the gases that have been produced during fermentation. Now comes one of the most satisfying steps in the entire process: dividing and shaping. Thomas has a large metal scraper, its edge worn sharp from years of use. He uses this to divide the dough into equal portions. His eye has become so practiced that he rarely needs to weigh them. He simply cuts, and each piece is within a few ounces of the others. For a batch this size, he'll get approximately 20 loaves. Each portion is shaped into a rough ball and set aside to rest for a few minutes. This brief rest allows the gluten to relax, making the dough easier to shape. If he tried to shape the loaves immediately, the dough would resist, would spring back, would be difficult to work with. But after 10 minutes of rest, it becomes cooperative. Now Thomas begins the final shaping. He takes the first ball of dough and presses it gently with his palms, flattening it into a rough rectangle. Then he folds it in thirds, like a letter being folded for an envelope. He seals the seam by pressing down with his thumbs. Then he rolls the dough gently, creating tension on the surface. This tension is important. It will help the loaf hold its shape during baking, will help it rise upward rather than spreading outward. The shaped loaf is placed in a long, shallow basket called a banneton. The banneton is lined with cloth and dusted with flour. It will hold the loaf during its final rise before baking. The shape of the banneton will impart a pattern to the bread's crust, a telltale marking that shows it was properly made. Thomas works through the batch methodically. Shape, fold, roll, place. Shape, fold, roll, place. His hands move with practiced efficiency. There's no wasted motion, no fumbling. Each loaf is shaped to the same standard, with the same attention. It doesn't matter that this is the 1,000th loaf he's shaped, or perhaps the 10,000th. Each one is treated as if it's the only one. James has finished kneading his dough for the rolls and is now shaping them. His technique is less refined than Thomas's, but it's improving. The rolls should be perfectly round, smooth on top, with no wrinkles or creases. James cups each piece of dough in his hand and rolls it in a circular motion against the table. Some of them come out perfectly spherical. Others are slightly lopsided. He'll get better with time. The shaped rolls are placed on large wooden boards, dusted with cornmeal to prevent sticking. They're arranged in neat rows, each one spaced so it will have room to expand during its final rise. James manages to fit 24 rolls on each board, and he has 4 boards total, nearly 100 rolls which will be baked after the loaves. By the time both Thomas and James have finished their shaping, the bakery looks quite different than it did an hour ago. The work tables are covered with bannetons and boards, all holding dough in various states of rising. The air smells strongly of fermentation now. That distinctive yeasty aroma that is the hallmark of any bakery. The shaped loaves will need to rise one more time before baking. This final rise is shorter than the first, usually about 30 to 45 minutes. During this time, the yeast will produce one last surge of gas, and the loaves will expand to very nearly their final size. Thomas checks the oven temperature while they wait. This is a skill that has no precise measurement, only experience. He opens the oven door and holds his hand inside, counting silently. If he can hold it there for 3 seconds before the heat becomes unbearable, the oven is too cool. If he can't even keep it there for a full second, it's too hot. The ideal is about 2 seconds, maybe slightly less. He adjusts the fire slightly, adding a few more pieces of wood. The oven is nearly ready, but not quite. Another 15 minutes should do it. While they wait, Thomas and James prepare the tools they'll need for baking. The long wooden paddle, called a peel, which will be used to slide the loaves into the oven. The linen cloths that will cover the loaves after they come out, to keep them from drying out. The wire racks where they'll cool. Thomas also prepares the wash that will be brushed on the loaves before they go into the oven. It's a simple mixture of water and flour, stirred into a thin paste. This will give the bread its characteristic sheen and help the crust develop a rich color. Some bakers use egg wash, but Thomas finds that flour wash works just as well and doesn't add any unnecessary flavor. Everything is ready. The loaves have risen. The oven is hot. Now comes the moment when all the preparation culminates, the baking itself. The oven is ready. Thomas can tell from the way heat shimmers in the air near its opening, from the deep warmth radiating from the bricks. He checks one more time, holding his hand inside briefly. Yes, it's perfect. James is standing by with the first board of rolls. These will go in first, as they bake more quickly than the loaves. But before anything goes into the oven, they must prepare the oven floor. Thomas takes a long-handled brush, made of bundled twigs, and dips it in water. Then he quickly sweeps it across the oven floor. The water hisses and evaporates instantly, creating a burst of steam. This steam is important. It will help the bread develop a crispy crust while keeping the interior moist. Now James brings the first board of rolls to the oven's opening. Thomas takes the peel and begins transferring the rolls from the board to the oven floor. He works quickly but carefully, sliding the peel under each roll and then giving it a quick jerk that deposits the roll in the oven. It takes practice to do this without disturbing the delicate risen dough. But Thomas's movements are smooth and confident. The rolls are arranged in rows inside the oven, each one given just enough space that they won't touch as they expand during baking. When the first board is empty, James brings the second, and Thomas continues the process. Within a few minutes, nearly 100 rolls are arranged inside the oven. Thomas closes the oven door, and the baking begins. Now comes a period of waiting, but it's not idle waiting. Thomas must monitor the oven temperature, adjusting the fire as needed. Too much heat at this stage, and the rolls will brown too quickly on the outside while remaining raw inside. Too little, and they'll dry out before they color properly. He also prepares the loaves for their turn in the oven. Each one must be removed from its banneton and placed on a board. This requires a deft touch. The loaf is carefully tipped out onto his hand, then gently transferred to the board, seam side down. The loaves are then brushed with the flour wash, using a soft brush that covers the entire surface with a thin, even layer. Finally, Thomas uses a sharp blade to make cuts in the top of each loaf. These cuts, called scores, serve a practical purpose. As the bread bakes, steam builds up inside. The scores give that steam a place to escape, preventing the loaf from bursting randomly. But the scores also serve an aesthetic purpose. They're the baker's signature, a pattern that makes each loaf distinctive. Thomas makes 3 parallel cuts across each loaf, quick and confident slashes that open the dough without deflating it. While Thomas prepares the loaves, James keeps an eye on the baking rolls. Through a small window in the oven door, he can see them beginning to color. They started pale and will gradually turn golden brown. The smell that fills the bakery now is one of the finest smells in the world. Fresh bread baking. After about 15 minutes, the rolls are done. Thomas can tell by their color, by the smell, and by a certain instinct that comes from years of practice. He opens the oven door, and a wave of heat pours out. Using the peel, he quickly removes the rolls, transferring them to cooling racks. The rolls are perfectly golden, their crusts crisp and shining, steam rises from them in gentle wisps. They're hot enough that touching them would be uncomfortable. So they're left to cool on the racks, arranged in neat rows. With the rolls out, the oven is ready for the loaves. Thomas works quickly now, because the oven has lost some heat with the door open. And he wants to take advantage of the intense temperature that remains. He takes the first board of loaves and begins sliding them into the oven, using the same technique he used with the rolls. The peel slides under each loaf, a quick jerk, and the loaf settles onto the hot bricks of the oven floor. The loaves are larger than the rolls, so fewer fit in the oven. Thomas can bake about 10 at a time. He arranges them with care, making sure each has adequate space. Once they're all in, he brushes water onto the oven floor one more time, creating another burst of steam, then closes the door. The baking of the loaves will take longer than the rolls did. 45 minutes, perhaps 50. The exact time varies, depending on many factors. The moisture in the dough, the precise temperature of the oven, even the weather outside. Humidity affects baking in ways that are subtle but real. Now comes the rhythm of the morning. While one batch of loaves bakes, Thomas and James work on other tasks. The second and third batches of dough are ready to be shaped. More rolls are being prepared. The shop must be open soon, and someone needs to tend to that. Thomas's wife, Martha, appears at the top of the stairs. She is dressed now, her hair pinned back, an apron already tied around her waist. She's been awake for some time, he knows, waiting until the appropriate moment to come down. "Morning," she says simply. "Morning," Tomo replies. She doesn't need to ask what needs doing. She's been part of this bakery for as long as Thomas has. She knows the rhythm as well as he does. While Thomas and James work on the bread, she'll prepare the shop for opening. She'll count out the correct amount of change for the till. She'll arrange the counter, making sure everything is clean and ready. She'll check the supply of paper for wrapping loaves. All the small details that must be attended to before customers begin arriving. Martha moves through the bakery and into the shop beyond. Through the open door, Thomas can hear her moving about, the small sounds of preparation. A drawer opening and closing, the soft clink of coins, the rustle of paper. James has begun shaping the second batch of loaves now. His technique has improved even in the short time since he shaped the rolls. His hands move more confidently, and the loaves he produces are more uniform. Thomas watches without seeming to watch, noting the progress, saying nothing. Praise can be given later if it's warranted. For now, the work is what matters. The first batch of loaves has been baking for about 20 minutes. Thomas checks them through the small window. They've risen beautifully, the scores opening into deliberate cracks that reveal the lighter interior. The crusts are beginning to color, starting to transition from pale to golden. They're not ready yet, but they're progressing well. He adds a few more pieces of wood to the fire. The oven temperature must be maintained. Too much variation, and the baking becomes uneven. Time passes in its measured way. The work continues without pause, but also without rush. Each task flows into the next. Shape the loaves, check the oven, adjust the fire, prepare the next batch. It's all part of a single continuous process. A choreography that has been perfected through repetition. Through the high windows, the grey of pre-dawn has given way to actual light. It's not sunshine yet. The sun won't clear the buildings across the street for another hour at least. But the darkness has definitively ended. The world outside is visible now, rendered in soft morning tones. The lamplights that seemed so necessary an hour ago now appear weak and yellowish. Their glow is overpowered by the natural light seeping through the windows. Soon they'll be extinguished, no longer needed. In the street outside, the city is beginning to wake. The sound of horses' hooves is more frequent now. Carts making early deliveries, their wheels rattling over the cobblestones. Voices occasionally drift in through the windows, though they're muted and indistinct. The daily life of the city is stirring. The first batch of loaves is nearly done now. Thomas watches them carefully during these final minutes. The crust has developed a deep golden color, exactly what he's looking for. The aroma filling the bakery has intensified, rich and wheaty and utterly appetizing. There's something primordial about the smell of baking bread, something that speaks to a very old part of the human brain. It's the smell of sustenance, of survival, of home. When Thomas judges the moment right, he opens the oven door and begins removing the loaves. The heat that pours out is intense, even after hours of working near the ovens. He works quickly, using the peel to retrieve each loaf and transfer it to a cooling rack. The loaves are beautiful, their crusts are crisp and golden brown, with deeper caramelization along the scores. When Thomas taps the bottom of one with his knuckles, it produces a hollow sound, another sign that it's properly baked. The loaves are immediately placed on cooling racks, where they'll release their steam gradually rather than becoming soggy from condensation. As soon as the first batch is out, the second batch goes in. Thomas has the loaves ready on their boards, already scored and brushed. He works through the same process. Load the oven, create steam, close the door. The rhythm is unbroken. James takes the opportunity during this transition to step outside briefly, just to the back door, just for a moment, to get a breath of air that isn't thick with heat and flour dust. Through the open door, a bit of cool morning air flows into the bakery, a brief respite from the warmth. When James returns, Thomas nods toward the cooling loaves. "Start moving those to the shop," he says. "Martha will want to get them displayed." James takes a large wooden tray and carefully loads it with loaves from the cooling rack. They're still quite warm, but cool enough to handle. He carries the tray through to the shop, where Martha is waiting. The shop's front window is its most important feature for display. Customers walking past should be able to see what's available, should be enticed by the sight of fresh bread. Martha arranges the loaves on a shelf that's visible from the street, placing them so they look abundant and appealing. The morning light, now strong enough to illuminate the shop, makes the golden crusts glow. James makes several trips, bringing out the rolls as well. These are placed in baskets on the counter where customers can easily point to them and indicate how many they want. Everything must be within easy reach, efficiently organized. During busy periods, there's no time to fumble about looking for things. While James and Martha handle the shop preparations, Thomas continues his work in the bakery. The second batch of loaves is baking. The third batch is being shaped. And he's starting another batch of dough for the afternoon's baking. The process never really stops. It just cycles forward, one stage feeding into the next. The bakery has reached its full working temperature now. Despite the cool morning air outside, it's quite warm in here. Thomas has long since stopped noticing the heat in any conscious way. It's simply the environment he works in, as natural to him as the air itself. His shirt is damp with perspiration, his face slightly flushed, but he works steadily, untroubled by the warmth. The light through the windows continues to strengthen. The quality of it changes minute by minute, becoming clearer, more direct. Somewhere beyond the buildings and the perpetual haze, the sun has risen. The day has officially begun. Martha unlocks the front door of the shop at precisely 8 o'clock. This is the opening time, the time customers have come to expect. To open earlier would be pointless. Few people are about. To open later would be to lose business to competitors. The first customer arrives within minutes. It's Mrs. Henderson from 2 streets over. An elderly woman who comes every morning at almost exactly the same time. She buys 2 rolls, one for her breakfast and one for her lunch. She's been doing this for as long as Thomas can remember. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," Martha says, warmly. "Good morning, Martha. Fresh rolls today?" "Just out of the oven. They smell wonderful as always." This same exchange occurs nearly every morning. The familiarity of it is comforting to both parties. Mrs. Henderson pays her 2 pence, receives her rolls wrapped in paper, and shuffles out the door, already breaking off a piece of one roll to eat on her walk home. The morning customer flow has its own rhythm, different from other parts of the day. These early customers are mostly working people, those who need to buy their breakfast before heading to their employment. They come in steadily, but not overwhelming numbers. a few at a time, with small gaps between each group. A labourer buys 4 rolls, which he stacks in his hands without bothering with paper wrapping. He'll eat them throughout his workday. A housemaid buys a loaf for her employer's household, paying with coins carefully counted from her purse. A clerk, distinguishable by his neat suit and ink-stained fingers, buys 2 rolls and eats one standing just outside the shop, watching the street while he chews. Martha handles each transaction with efficient courtesy. She knows many of these customers by name, knows what they usually buy, can often have their purchase ready before they even request it. But she's not chatty. There's friendly, but there's also brisk. People need to get on with their mornings, and so does she. In the bakery, Thomas is pulling the second batch of loaves from the oven. They're perfect, just like the first batch. The consistency is important. Customers come to expect a certain quality, and delivering anything less would be a betrayal of their trust. Every loaf must meet the standard. James is working on specialty items now. Currant buns, which are popular in the mornings. The dough is similar to the bread dough but slightly richer, with a bit of butter and sugar added. The currants are folded in during the final stages of kneading, distributed throughout the dough. These buns will be smaller than the loaves, sweeter, with a softer crust. They're a small luxury, something people buy when they have a few extra pennies and want something beyond plain bread. The morning is settling into its pattern now. The urgent work of getting the first loaves baked is complete. There's still much to do, but the pace is more measured now. Thomas can afford to work slightly slower, to give his arms and back a rest after the intense activity of the early morning. He takes a moment to drink some water from the pitcher kept in the corner. The water is cool and clean, drawn fresh this morning from the pump. It's refreshing after hours of breathing in the hot, dry air near the ovens. He drinks deeply, then pours a bit over his hands, washing away some of the accumulated flour and sweat. James is entitled to a short break as well. He steps outside again, this time to the front of the shop rather than the back. The street is busy now with morning traffic. Carts, pedestrians, the occasional carriage, the city in full activity. James leans against the wall, watching the flow of life passing by. In 10 minutes, he'll go back inside and resume his work. But for now, he simply stands, breathing air that doesn't smell of bread, letting his muscles relax. Inside the shop, Martha is serving a small rush of customers. 3 women have arrived nearly simultaneously, each wanting loaves for their households. There's a brief moment of crowding, of waiting, but Martha handles it smoothly. She wraps loaves, takes payment, makes change. All while keeping the conversation pleasant. The women leave satisfied, their bread tucked under their arms or into baskets. A child arrives next, probably sent by his mother. He's perhaps 8 years old, and he clutches a coin tightly in his hand. 2 rolls, please, ma'am, he says, his voice serious with responsibility. Martha gives him 3 rolls instead of 2, wrapping them in paper. Tell your mother the extra ones for being a polite young man, she says. The boy's eyes widen with delight. Thank you, ma'am. He scurries out, careful not to drop his precious cargo. These small kindnesses are part of the business. They cost very little, but create goodwill. The boy's mother will remember this, will continue to be a loyal customer, will perhaps tell her neighbors about the generosity of Fletcher's bakery. Reputation is built on many things, but the small acts of kindness are not the least of them. The third batch of loaves is cooling now, and Thomas is working on the afternoon's dough. The process is the same as it was in the darkness of pre-dawn, but somehow it feels different in the full light of morning. The work is no less important, no less demanding, but there's a certain relaxation that comes with knowing the critical morning baking is complete. James is making cottage loaves now, a different shape than the standard loaves. A cottage loaf consists of 2 rounds of jumbo, one smaller than the other, stacked and pressed together. The result looks something like a snowman made of bread. They're traditional, popular with older customers who remember them from their childhoods. Thomas doesn't make them every day, but often enough to satisfy demand. The shaping of a cottage loaf requires more skill than a standard loaf. The 2 pieces must be properly proportioned, and they must be joined securely enough that they won't separate during baking. James has made them before, but he's still learning the nuances. His first attempt is slightly lopsided, the top portion not quite centered on the bottom. He looks at it critically, then looks at Thomas. "That'll do," Thomas says. "It'll taste just as good." James nods and continues with the next one. By the third cottage loaf, his technique has improved noticeably. The proportions are better, the joining more secure. This is how skills are developed, through doing, through making mistakes, through incremental improvement. The bakery has settled into a comfortable warmth now, rather than the intense heat of earlier. The fires in the ovens are being allowed to burn down somewhat. They'll be rebuilt later for the afternoon baking, but for now, only maintenance heat is needed. Thomas takes this opportunity to perform some of the cleaning tasks that must be done daily. The work tables are scraped down, removing the accumulated flour and bits of dough. The floor is swept, pushing flour dust and crumbs into a pile that will be collected later. The troughs are washed out with hot water and left to dry. Everything must be clean before the next cycle of work begins. In the shop, business has slowed to a trickle. The morning rush is over. Most people who need bread for today have already bought it. There will be another small uptick around lunchtime, and then a larger one in the late afternoon when people buy bread for their evening meals. But for now, things are quiet. Martha takes advantage of the lull to do her own cleaning and organizing. She wipes down the counter, sweeps the floor, restocks the supply of wrapping paper. She also takes this time to do some quick accounting, noting in a ledger how many loaves and rolls have been sold so far. This information will help Thomas know how much to bake in the afternoon. A cat appears in the doorway of the shop. A large orange tom that belongs to no one in particular, but seems to have adopted the bakery as part of his territory. He sits just outside the threshold, too dignified to beg, but making his presence known. Martha breaks off a small piece of roll and tosses it to him. He accepts it with feline nonchalance, eating it in delicate bites before wandering off on whatever business cats have in the daytime. In the bakery, the cottage loaves are ready to go into the oven. The main baking is done for the morning, but the ovens are still hot enough for these specialty items. James loads them onto a board and brings them to Thomas, who slides them into the oven with practiced ease. While the cottage loaves bake, Thomas and James prepare the ingredients for the afternoon session. More flour is measured out and set aside. Salt is portioned. Water is drawn from the pump and left to come to room temperature. Water that's too cold will slow the fermentation, while water that's too warm will make it too fast. Thomas also checks the yeast supply. The blocks of compressed yeast are stored in a cool, dark cupboard. He examines them carefully, checking for any signs of spoilage or contamination. Good yeast is essential to good bread, and he takes no chances with it. The blocks look fine, so he cuts off the amount he'll need for the afternoon and sets it aside. James takes this opportunity to eat something himself. A roll from the morning batch, now fully cooled, and a bit of cheese that he brought from home. He eats standing up, leaning against one of the work tables. There's no formal break for meals in a bakery. You eat when you can, quickly, then get back to work. Thomas doesn't eat yet. He'll wait until later, until the afternoon dough is started and he can afford to step away for a few minutes. For now, he's content with more water, and perhaps a piece of the bread, eaten more out of habit than hunger. The cottage loaves come out of the oven after about 30 minutes. They're beautifully browned, the distinctive shape pronounced and appealing. James carries them to the cooling racks, proud of his work. They'll go out to the shop soon, where they'll likely sell quickly. People appreciate the variety, the break from the standard loaf shape. There's a particular quality to the middle hours of a bakery day. The frantic energy of morning baking has passed. The afternoon rush hasn't yet begun. The work continues, but at a gentler pace. It's in these hours that the bakery feels most like itself, most settled into its purpose. Thomas is mixing the afternoon dough now. His movements are automatic, requiring almost no conscious thought. His hands know what to do, how much to mix, when to stop. His mind is free to wander slightly, though it never wanders far from the work. He thinks about practical things, the delivery of flour that's expected tomorrow, a repair that needs to be made to one of the proving baskets, whether they should increase production slightly next week, when the weather is expected to turn colder and demand usually rises. These are the concerns of a working baker. Not grand or philosophical, just the practical considerations of running a business, of providing a necessary service, of maintaining the routines that keep everything functioning. James is cleaning out the ovens now. This is a job that must be done regularly but carefully. The ovens are still quite hot, too hot to reach far inside, but cool enough that the ash can be raked out. James uses a long-handled rake to pull the accumulated ash toward the opening, where it can be scooped into a bucket. It's dirty work, and by the time he's finished, his face and arms are smudged with soot. "Go wash up," Thomas tells him. "You look like a chimney sweep." James grins and heads to the pump in the corner. There's a basin there for washing, and he scrubs his hands and arms thoroughly, then splashes water on his face. He's not particularly bothered by the dirt. It's part of the work, as natural as the flour dust. In the shop, Martha is serving a midday customer, a prosperous-looking woman with a maid in tow. They're buying rather more than usual. 3 loaves, a dozen rolls, and all 6 of the cottage loaves that were made this morning. "Having company, Mrs. Ashworth?" Martha asks, pleasantly. "My sister and her family are visiting from Birmingham," the woman explains. "Staying the whole weekend, so I'll need rather a lot of bread. I'll send Molly back tomorrow for more." "We'll make sure to have plenty ready," Martha assures her. This is good business. Occasional large orders like this help make up for the smaller sales of regular days. And a satisfied customer with visitors will often recommend the bakery, potentially bringing in new regular customers. The purchases are wrapped carefully, and the maid takes them, stacking them in a large basket she's brought for the purpose. Mrs. Ashworth pays, adding an extra penny as a tip, which Martha accepts with a gracious thank you. The two women leave, and the shop returns to quiet. Thomas has finished mixing the afternoon dough and is now kneading it. This batch will provide the bread for tomorrow morning. It will be shaped this afternoon, will rise overnight in a cool place, and will be ready to bake first thing in the morning. This overlap, this continuous cycle of preparation, is essential to keeping the bakery functioning. One is always thinking ahead, always preparing for the next stage. The rhythm of the kneading is meditative. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. Thomas's breathing synchronizes with the movement. His mind empties of thought, focusing only on the feel of the dough under his hands, the way it responds to pressure, the subtle changes in its texture as the gluten develops. Outside, church bells ring 11 times. The sound drifts through the windows, marking the hour. Time passes whether one pays attention to it or not. But it's useful to have these markers, these reminders of where one is in the day. James has finished cleaning the ovens and is now sweeping the floor again. Flour dust and ash are swept into a pile, which he collects in a dustpan and disposes of outside. The bakery is looking tidier now, more organized. There's satisfaction in maintaining order, in keeping the workspace clean and functional. Martha brings through cups of tea for Thomas and James. It's mid-morning by the clock, but feels like afternoon, given how early they started. The tea is hot and strong, sweetened with a bit of sugar. They drink it standing at the work table, not taking time to sit. The warmth of the tea is welcome, even though the bakery is still quite warm. There's something restorative about it, something that renews energy for the work still to come. "How's the afternoon looking?" Thomas asks Martha. "Should be steady," she says. "We've sold about half the morning's loaves already." "I'd expect the rest to go by evening." Thomas nods. This is what he wanted to hear. Selling out is good, but selling out too early means people go away disappointed. Having a few loaves left at day's end is acceptable, even desirable. They can be sold at a slightly reduced price to those who come late, and nothing goes to waste. "I'll bake another 15 loaves this afternoon then," he says, "plus the usual rolls. That should do nicely." Martha agrees. She collects the empty teacups and returns to the shop. Through the open door, Thomas can see her settling onto the stool behind the counter, taking advantage of the quiet period to rest her feet for a few minutes. It's a long day for her too, standing behind that counter, serving customers, managing the small transactions that add up to the bakery's income. The afternoon dough has been kneaded and is now rising in its trough. Thomas finally allows himself a proper break. He goes upstairs to the living quarters, where a simple meal has been left for him. Bread, of course. Some cheese. A bit of cold meat left from yesterday's supper. An apple. He eats at the small table, looking out the window at the street below. The view is unremarkable. Building across the way, much like his own. The constant traffic of the street. Nothing beautiful or particularly interesting. But it's his view, the scene he sees every day, and there's comfort in its familiarity. He eats slowly, grateful for the chance to sit, to take weight off his feet and back. The physical demands of baking are constant, but usually manageable. Still, by early afternoon, after 7 or 8 hours of continuous work, the body begins to register its complaints. The break helps, allows muscles to rest briefly before the afternoon session begins. After 15 minutes, Thomas returns downstairs. He's not the kind of person who can rest for long. There's always work to be done, and idle hands feel strange to him. He's most comfortable when occupied, when moving through the familiar tasks of his craft. James has used the break time to run a quick errand. He's returned now with a packet from the chandler's shop down the street. Candles, which the bakery uses in the winter months when the days are short and work must sometimes be done by lamplight alone. The afternoon routine begins now. The pattern is similar to the morning, but on a smaller scale. Less bread is needed for the next day than was needed for today. Tomorrow is Sunday, when many people are at church in the morning and baking demand is lower. Thomas shapes the overnight dough into loaves, working through the familiar motions. These loaves will rest in a cool storage area upstairs, where the temperature will slow their rise to a crawl. By morning, they'll be perfectly ready to bake, having developed flavor slowly throughout the night. While Thomas works on the overnight loaves, James begins preparing dough for this afternoon's baking. More rolls, mostly, which sell well in the late afternoon to people who want fresh bread for their suppers. Also some small sweet buns, flavored with cinnamon and a touch of honey. These are popular with children and are usually bought as treats rather than necessities. The work continues in its steady way. There's a timelessness to it, a sense that this scene has been repeated countless times before and will be repeated countless times again. Bakers have been doing this work for centuries, for millennia. The specifics change, the location, the people, the exact methods, but the essential nature of it remains constant. Flour, water, salt, yeast. Mix, knead, shape, bake. The transformation of simple ingredients into sustenance. The afternoon sun slants through the windows now, creating bars of golden light across the work tables. Dust particles float in these beams, millions of tiny motes drifting slowly downward. The light has a different quality than morning light, warmer somehow, more amber than silver. Thomas pauses for a moment, his hands resting on the dough he's shaping. He looks at the light, at the way it illuminates the bakery, and feels something he might not be able to name. Contentment, perhaps, or simply the quiet satisfaction of a life spent in useful work. He doesn't articulate these thoughts, doesn't examine them too closely. He simply feels them, briefly, before returning his attention to the task at hand. The ovens have been rebuilt and are heating again. The process is the same as it was in the early morning, though somehow it feels less urgent now. The fires are lit, the temperature builds gradually, the bricks absorb heat and prepare to release it slowly and evenly. James's dough for the afternoon rolls has risen and is ready to shape. He works through the batch, rolling each piece into a smooth ball. His technique has improved noticeably even since this morning. The rolls are more uniform, more perfectly round. Thomas watches without comment, but he's pleased with what he sees. The boy is learning, developing the touch that distinguishes merely adequate work from genuinely good work. The shaped rolls are placed on boards to rise one final time. While they rise, Thomas and James clean and organize, preparing for the coming bake. The peels are dusted with flour. The cooling racks are positioned. Everything is put in its place so that when the moment comes, they can work efficiently. In the shop, business has picked up somewhat. It's mid-afternoon now, and people are beginning to think about their evening meals. A steady stream of customers flows through, buying loaves and rolls, occasionally some of the specialty items. Martha handles each transaction with practiced efficiency, wrapping purchases, making change, offering pleasant words. A woman comes in with a complaint. The loaf she bought yesterday had a hard spot in the crumb. Martha apologizes, examines the half-eaten loaf the woman has brought back, and immediately gives her a replacement loaf at no charge. The woman leaves mollified, even slightly embarrassed for having complained. Probably she let it dry out on her counter. Martha tells Thomas when she steps into the bakery briefly, but better to replace it than argue. Thomas agrees. A loaf costs them perhaps 2 pence in materials and labour. The goodwill of a regular customer is worth far more than that. These small losses are simply part of doing business. The rolls are ready to bake now. Thomas loads them into the oven, working quickly and smoothly. The familiar hiss of water on hot bricks, the wave of heat from the open door, the careful placement of each roll. It's all automatic now. His body moving through movements it has made thousands of times before. The door closes and the baking begins. 15 minutes, perhaps 20. James keeps watch while Thomas starts on the sweet buns. These require a slightly different approach. The dough is softer, enriched with butter and eggs and honey. It's more delicate to work with, requiring a gentler touch. Thomas shapes them into small rounds, then uses his thumb to press a deep indentation in the center of each one. Into this indentation goes a small amount of cinnamon mixed with sugar. When baked, the center will be sweet and aromatic, contrasting with the softer, more buttery dough surrounding it. The shaped buns are arranged on a board, and when the rolls come out of the oven, the buns go in. They'll bake more quickly than veg rolls, perhaps 10 minutes. They must be watched carefully to prevent over-browning. The afternoon light continues to shift, becoming even more golden as the sun moves lower in the sky. The bakery, which was cool and dark when Thomas first entered it before dawn, is now warm and filled with light. The arc of the day is visible in the changing quality of that light, in the way shadows fall, in the color of the air itself. The rolls are cooling now, and their aroma fills the bakery. James carries them to the shop, where they're immediately placed in the display. Several customers who happen to be in the shop at that moment buy them still warm, the heat coming through the paper wrapping. Thomas removes the sweet buns from the oven. They're perfect. Golden brown, slightly puffy, with the cinnamon sugar centers caramelized and fragrant. These will sell quickly, he knows. They always do. Children will beg their parents for them, and more often than not, the parents will give in. The afternoon baking is complete now. The ovens will be allowed to cool down for the evening. There's no more baking to be done today. What remains is cleaning, organizing, preparing for tomorrow's cycle to begin again. The bakery is winding down now, though the shop remains busy. This is the busiest time of the retail day, when people stop on their way home from work to buy bread for supper. Martha is constantly occupied, serving one customer after another, wrapping loaves, making change, occasionally recommending one item over another. A man asks for advice. Should he buy a whole loaf or several rolls? Martha considers his situation. He's mentioned it's just himself and his wife, and recommends the rolls. They'll stay fresher since he can eat them 1 or 2 at a time. The man thanks her for the counsel and buys a half-dozen rolls. These small acts of genuine service, of actually helping rather than simply selling, are what build loyalty. The man will remember that Martha steered him toward the more practical, less expensive option. He'll come back. In the bakery, Thomas and James are deep into cleaning. The work tables are scrubbed thoroughly with hot water. The troughs are washed and left to dry upside down. The floor is swept again, then mopped. The tools are cleaned and put away in their designated places. Everything must be ready for tomorrow's early start. The ovens are swept out one final time. The ashes collected and removed. The oven floors are brushed clean. When Thomas opens the morning, he'll find everything exactly as it should be, ready for immediate use. James is scrubbing his hands and arms at the pump, trying to remove the accumulated flour and dough. It's a losing battle in some ways. There's flour ground into the creases of his palms, lodged under his fingernails. He'll carry it home with him, will probably still smell faintly of bread when he lies down to sleep tonight. But he scrubs anyway, making the effort. Thomas is checking the supplies, making mental notes of what will need to be ordered soon. The flour supply is adequate for another 3 or 4 days. The salt is fine for a week at least. But they're running low on the cornmeal that's used to prevent sticking on the boards. He'll need to send James to the mill sometime this week to purchase more. The yeast is also running lower than he'd like. That will need to be replenished soon. Fresh yeast is essential, and while the blocks keep reasonably well in cool storage, they don't last forever. Better to restock before running out than to find oneself short at a critical moment. He makes these mental notes, adding them to the running inventory he keeps in his head. Years of experience have taught him to think ahead, to anticipate needs before they become urgent. It's part of the responsibility of running the business. Martha appears in the doorway. "We're nearly sold out," she reports. "Just 3 loaves left, and a handful of rolls." "Good," Thomas says. "Save one of the loaves for us, sell the rest." She nods and returns to the shop. The remaining loaves will likely sell within the next hour. By closing time at 6 o'clock, they should be completely out, which is exactly the right outcome. Enough for everyone who wanted to buy, but not so much excess that significant inventory is left over. James has finished his cleaning and is putting on his coat. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Fletcher?" "Same time," Thomas confirms. Though tomorrow being Sunday, that time will be slightly later. 4 o'clock rather than 3:30. Even bakers get a small concession to the Lord's Day. James nods and heads out the back door. His footsteps fade as he walks down the alley toward the street. Another day's work done. Another day of learning the craft that will eventually be his living. Thomas takes a few more minutes to make a final inspection of the bakery. Everything is clean. Everything is in order. Everything is ready for tomorrow. Satisfied, he douses the remaining lamps and heads upstairs. The shop closes at 6 o'clock. Martha flips the sign on the door from open to closed and locks it. The last customer has departed. The last loaf has been sold. The day's business is complete. She counts the money in the till, stacking coins in neat piles, keeping a running tally in the ledger. The arithmetic is simple but must be accurate. Every penny must be accounted for. Every transaction recorded. When she's finished, she wraps the day's takings in cloth and places them in the strongbox that's kept in a locked cupboard beneath the counter. The total is good. Not exceptional, but solid. A typical Thursday in October, which is what it should be. Consistency is valuable in a business like this. Wild swings in income would be cause for concern, suggesting either problems with the product or instability in the customer base. But steady, predictable income means the bakery is serving its purpose, meeting the neighborhood's needs day after day. Martha sweeps the shop floor one last time, collecting the crumbs and bits of crust that have accumulated throughout the day. Even a clean shop has these remnants by closing time. Evidence of bread handled, wrapped, examined by customers deciding what to buy. She empties the dustpan out the back door, where birds will find the crumbs in the morning. The loaf that Thomas requested has been set aside, along with a few of the sweet buns that didn't sell. These will be their supper, or part of it at least. Martha will prepare something to go with the bread, perhaps some soup, or eggs, or whatever's available in the larder. The meal will be simple but sufficient. She climbs the stairs to the living quarters, carrying the bread. The smell of it fills the stairwell. That particular aroma of well-made bread that never quite fades from a bakery, that permeates the walls and floors and becomes part of the building itself. Thomas is sitting at the table, his feet propped on another chair, his body in a rare state of complete rest. The day's work has taken its toll, as it always does. His back aches, his feet are sore, his arms are tired from kneading and lifting. But it's a good tiredness, the kind that comes from honest work completed. "Good day?" he asks Martha as she enters. "Good day," she confirms. "Sold everything except what I saved for us." He nods, satisfied. This is how it should be. This is success, though not in any dramatic or obvious way. Just the simple success of doing one's work properly, serving customers well, making enough to support oneself and save a bit for the future. Martha prepares their supper while Thomas continues to rest. She moves efficiently around the small kitchen area, her movements practiced and economical. Water is heated, vegetables are chopped, simple preparations are made. Within 20 minutes, there's a pot of soup simmering, filling the room with savory steam. They eat at the table, the bread torn into pieces and dipped in the soup. There's little conversation. They're both tired. And besides, they've been in each other's presence all day. There's no need to fill the silence with unnecessary words. They eat in comfortable quiet, the spoons clicking softly against the bowls, the bread crusty and chewy and exactly right. After supper, Martha clears the dishes while Thomas prepares for tomorrow. He checks the dough that's been set aside for the overnight rise. The loaves are covered with damp cloths in the cool storage room, where they'll develop slowly through the night. By morning, they'll be ready to bake immediately. He examines them briefly, confirming they're progressing as they should, then leaves them to their slow transformation. When he returns to the living quarters, Martha has finished the dishes and is sitting by the window with some mending. The light is fading now, the last of the day's brightness giving way to the blue of evening. Soon it will be fully dark, and the lamps will need to be lit. But for now, there's this transitional time, this gentle hour between day and night. Thomas sits in his chair, letting his body relax completely. His hands, which have been working since 3 o'clock this morning, rest still in his lap. His breathing slows. His mind empties of thought, or nearly so. He doesn't think about tomorrow, though tomorrow will be much like today. He doesn't think about the work that awaits him in the dark hours before dawn. He simply exists in this moment, in this quiet room, with the familiar presence of his wife nearby and the smell of bread still faint in the air, in the salle. The light is nearly gone now. Martha rises to light the lamps, one in the kitchen area and one near her chair, so she can see her mending. The warm glow pushes back against the darkness outside, creating a small island of light in the evening. Outside, the sounds of the city are changing. The daytime bustle has faded. The heavy traffic of carts and carriages has diminished. What remains are the softer sounds of evening, voices drifting from nearby houses, the distant bark of a dog, footsteps of people walking home from taverns or late work. Thomas has been dozing slightly in his chair, not quite asleep, but not quite awake. This happens most evenings, the exhaustion of the day catching up with him, his body insisting on rest. He doesn't fight it. There's no reason to stay awake simply for the sake of being awake. Martha finishes her mending and sets it aside. "I'm going to bed," she announces. "You should too." Thomas nods but doesn't move immediately. He'll go to bed soon, but there's something peaceful about these final moments of the day. Sitting in the lamplight, the world quiet around him. He allows himself a few more minutes of this peace. Eventually, though, he rises. The lamp in the kitchen is extinguished. The one by Martha's chair is turned down low and left burning. It will serve as a nightlight, should anyone need to move around in the darkness. Thomas climbs the stairs to the bedroom. Martha is already in bed, the blankets pulled up to her chin. The room is cool now that the warmth from the ovens below has dissipated. In the winter, this room can be quite cold, cold enough to see one's breath in the morning. But tonight, it's merely cool, comfortable enough for sleeping. Thomas undresses in the darkness, hanging his clothes on the same chair where he found them this morning. He slides into bed beside Martha, feeling the warmth of her presence, the familiar comfort of their shared space. "Good night," she murmurs, already half asleep. "Good night," he replies. He closes his eyes. His body, so long in motion, finally stills completely. The aches and tiredness that have accumulated throughout the day begin to fade as sleep approaches. His breathing deepens, slows, becomes regular. In a few hours, he'll wake again. His body's internal clock, refined by years of the same routine, will rouse him in the darkness. He'll rise, dress, descend the stairs, and begin again. The cycle will continue, as it has continued, as it will continue. The work of the baker, endless and essential, ordinary and vital. But for now, there is sleep. Deep, restful sleep, earned through a day of honest labor. His last conscious thought, if it can be called a thought at all, is a dim awareness of satisfaction. The day was good. The work was done properly. Tomorrow will be much the same. And then even that fades, and there is only darkness and rest and the slow passage of hours until morning comes again. The night passes. The city sleeps, or most of it does. In the darkness, life continues in its own way. A baby cries in a neighboring building. A cat prowls through alleys. The night watchman makes his rounds, calling out the hours in a voice that barely carries in the still air. In the bakery below, the overnight loaves rise slowly in their cool storage. The yeast works patiently, consuming sugars, producing gas, developing flavor. The dough expands gradually, invisibly, transforming in the darkness. By morning, it will be ready. By morning, the cycle will begin again. At 3 o'clock, Thomas's eyes open. There is no struggle, no reluctance. His body knows. Time to rise. Time to begin. He dresses in the darkness, his hands finding his clothes by memory. He descends the stairs, his feet knowing which steps creak and which don't. He lights the lamp, fills the kettle, begins the process once more. The fire is built in the ovens. The water boils for tea. The quiet rituals of beginning are performed. And then the work starts again. The same work as yesterday. The same work as tomorrow. The eternal work of transforming simple ingredients into sustenance. This is the life of the Victorian baker. Not exciting, not dramatic, but essential. Every day, in bakeries throughout the city, throughout the country, throughout the world, this work is done. Bread is made, people are fed, life continues. And in this small bakery, on this small street, Thomas Fletcher stands at his work table in the lamplight, his hands in dough, doing what he has done for 20 years, what he will continue to do for as many more years as his body allows. The work is its own reward. The rhythm is its own purpose. The bread, warm and golden and perfect, is its own justification. And somewhere in the darkness outside, the city begins to stir, preparing for another day, another cycle, another turn of the great wheel of ordinary life that keeps humanity fed and housed and continuing on its endless journey through time. The oven warms, the dough rises, the baker works, and morning comes again, as it always does, bringing with it the smell of fresh bread and the quiet satisfaction of work well done.